Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and this is the Leadership Exchange. I'm really excited, Lupe, today about our guest and the fact that we're back on air, but something else I think is going to be fun and kind of a new experience for our listeners is the format change. We're still going to be talking a lot about leadership for young leaders or leadership for people that are new into leadership roles. But the form is going to be a little more free format. We're going to bring in some additional guests, and we've got a great one today that I'm really excited to get started with.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Today, I'm pretty excited about our guest also. Lydia Peterson is the Executive Director for Environmental Health and Safety at V2X. She's responsible for all strategic environmental health and safety management across the company. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Safety and Occupational Health from California State University, Northridge. With more than 29 years of experience in the EHS career field, she's worked in the U.S. Army and within private industry. She also has key EHS roles in several companies in the past, including Harris, Excelis, ITT, Reliant Energy, Entrix Incorporated, and Antion. Her experience includes creating, inspecting environmental health and safety programs, guiding and promoting safe work performance by implementing and evaluating safety processes, policies, and procedures. Lidia has a comprehensive background in EHS with the EPA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, federal, state, and local compliance. Lidia, welcome to the show. I feel like you're going to provide a fantastic perspective for our audience. As is customary for us, we like to start with a story. If you could share one that was very meaningful for you from a leadership perspective, that would be fantastic. And then maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Lupe and Steve. It's really an honor to be here with you today and to share with you some of the experiences that I've had and just the evolution that I've navigated with my career and what I do. I'll first say I actually really love what I do. I know it's environment, health, and safety, and some folks are like, what is all that? And sounds kind of boring, but I actually really enjoy what I do. And where I work, what I support is really cool and close to my heart as well. But I think I'll start off with, my adventure into this space. And while I was going through school, I actually worked evening shifts at a hospital. I read cardiac rhythms. I worked on a telemetry unit. And there I met a woman who's actually a part-time nurse and full-time talent agent. And we were talking a little bit about just backgrounds and whatnot. And we got to talking about how I have a background in martial arts. She's like, hey, I'm working with a organization where we're doing some auditions for Power Rangers. At the time, I was in my early 20s and I looked very young. So she was like, well, you could pass for a 16-year-old because that's what they were looking for in that space. And long story short, I ended up auditioning for the show The Power Rangers in the 90s. Well, since my acting career didn't take off, I joined the military so that I could pay off my college loans. So that was like a huge change in my whole career path. And my mom was like, you're going to do what? Join the Army. And I'm a Navy brat. That created a whole nother conversation at the house. But I ended up going into the Army. I really enjoyed it. At first, I was, maybe I made a mistake. And I went to my first sergeant. And I said, I think I need to talk to you about failure to adapt and a discharge. And he said, well, we have an opportunity for you to compete for Soldier of the Month. So you have 7 days to be prepared. So I went on to compete for Soldier of the Month. And then subsequently, I competed for Soldier of the Year. And that went really well and started to really understand the military a little bit more. It was really my first exposure to a very dynamic environment with leadership, and learning how to lead also involves learning how to follow and being around a number of different types of walks of life, different cultures. Everything that kind of came together was how people led. So that was my real first exposure, I think, to leadership, and where I have cultivated my own style, if you will, of leadership. But coming through the ranks in the military, and I didn't get very far. I went into the military as an E4 because I had already graduated from college. And my first 2 years was really learning how to identify ranks. I didn't understand that too well. It took me almost a year to figure that out, but got there. And then, like I said, I competed for Soldier of the Month, Soldier of the Quarter, then Soldier of the Year. And then I put my papers in for Officer Candidate School and was selected. So I went to Officer Candidate School, did really well, enjoyed the challenge, enjoyed the camaraderie there. But unfortunately, I experienced a heat stroke that eventually put me out of the military on a medical discharge. So honorably discharged, but I had to redirect and pivot once again. Where was I going to go? What was I going to do? So now I have this degree in environment, occupational safety, and health, and I have some military experience. So it was just kind of a good fit to find a Department of Defense contractor and still be at a place where my husband was at, because he was at Fort Irwin as a soldier. And there was a Department of Defense contractor there called ITT. And I ended up becoming an environment, health, and safety coordinator, if you will. And so I spent about a year there and ended up navigating life, had my first baby. And, my husband and I moved closer to where he was stationed, because after Fort Irwin, he became a recruiter closer to my hometown. And Jack's my husband, we went on vacation to Washington for a wedding. And I was checking emails and got an email from Mr. Steve McKeon. Said, would you be interested in looking at a position with ITT? And I was like, oh, I know ITT. And this place was in Colorado. And I grew up Southern California, was in the military. Said, sure, I'll take a look at it. Ended up interviewing with Steve and got a position with the company there. But I will say, one of the things that I have learned about leadership going from university into the workforce, but it wasn't until I met Steve that I really understood relational capacity. And I think it was from Steve that I learned this statement, and I've kept it close to my heart and what I do on a daily basis. But relational capacity is good currency, and really understanding the impact that has with being able to collaborate with people, being able to learn from others, and then also learn from yourself. And, early on in my career, I was so focused on executing a task and delivering results that anytime somebody gave me a task, it was my mission to deliver results. And so it took me a little bit longer to really understand that, while I'm on one path, I have to work with others, and they don't work at the same speed or the same capacity that I do. And Steve really helped me to kind of navigate that and embrace diversity from that standpoint, and diversity in terms of how other people think, how other people deliver results, how other people are motivated and encouraged and move in that direction. So I think with my own maturity and growth and understanding relationships, the relational capacity really helped me to also grow as a person, both personally and professionally. And so now, as I've navigated my career, I'm committed to, helping others grow, giving others that opportunity. I was, once very young in the industry, and Steve gave me an opportunity and gave me some exposure. And so I'm committed to doing the same with my teams. And, again, the part about understanding how other people are motivated, was, I think, my biggest change and shift in where I am at with my career. So it wasn't more just focused on me delivering results, but how we deliver results as a team, and people do things differently, and they're motivated differently. But at the end of the day, we're all coming together to give results, provide those results, but our journeys are all a little bit different, and it allows us to learn about one another, but it also allows us to create that level of confidence, that credibility, that trust, and that open communication.
Thank you, Lydia. Fantastic. I think you've introduced a topic or a phrase that maybe we've not used in our episodes, but it's a very important one around relational capacity. For our listeners, I did a quick lookup on this, and It's basically defined as the amount of trust and of safety that exists among a group members. That circle of safety that we've talked about in the past episodes, Simon Sinek did a good talk on that. That, I believe, is what you're referring to, Lydia. Would you agree with that, or is that a different definition from your perspective?
No, I think
Yeah,
that's
Lydia,
on
it's
point.
great to have you on the podcast and reflecting on just the journey that we went through early on in my career with the company we both went to work for. We had a program manager at another location, and I was looking for someone that could connect better than some of the current staff that were doing environmental health and safety. And not that they weren't good at doing environmental health and safety, but it was really understanding the business side of it and being able to build those relationships. And the funny story, although Lydia tells me it's a urban legend, Lupe, is Lydia, like myself, a little bit vertically challenged, and she was talking to a bunch of 6'2" workers in the desert in Fort Irwin, and the program manager, at least how the story goes that he told me, is that she was totally being ignored and decided that she needed to get everybody's attention. So she found a couple 55-gallon drums, got them together, jumped on top, and got everybody going on the same page. And I was like, when I heard that story, I'm like, yeah, I like that. I need to find this individual and just see what's there. And anyway, it's been a great journey. And we had a lot of really interesting times. When you think about the past, Lydia, where we've started working. So just kind of going back into the stories, Libby, there were just different levels that we started with, right? So the first one was, hey, we got to get organized. We got to develop kind of a plan of attack, some strategy around how we're going to get going in this space. And so one of the things I really admired about Lydia was her ability to go study the information, right? She can retain a lot of information really quick, make some really good conclusions. The funny part, though, for me was she would come to me with a bunch of this information, and then she would just kind of look at me like, okay, now what? As Lupe and I've talked about, I learned early on, if you want to develop people in the organization, you really need to, as tempting as it is, not give them the answer. Let them kind of deduct, hey, here's what I think we should do. And so I would say from the learning curve, that was something that it was a little challenged with. I think my style of management at the time, but she was a great student and pupil. And, through that process, we probably developed better solutions together, going back and forth with that kind of exchange. And we could have definitely with just me kind of saying, hey, let's try this, let's do this. So I really enjoyed the collaboration and just, the high IQ and EQ that Lydia developed over the time that we worked together. And I think through that, I feel a lot of my professional success was, really driven by the fact that, there were people like Lydia that I was able to work with. We had Alan Leibowitz on I think he was our first guest several months back. And just that whole team that we had at ITT at the time, was a great group. Lydia and I have talked about that a couple times, just the collaboration we had as a group and sharing best practices. And so taking that forward was interesting. It was a tough environment too, Lupe. And Lydia, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of this here, but we were in the service side of defense contracting industry. And so there just, it was a hectic time. There was not a lot of patience and time, as she'd mentioned, for doing environmental health and safety work. And there was kind of an excuse, right? Oh, we're really busy. We got all this work overseas that we're having to do. And we had to slow things down. We had to get things relevant in a way that, folks would stop and start paying attention to, this area. And, Lydia, if you could, you've got a couple of really good stories in that space that I think is a new leader at the time. What were some of those lessons learned?
That's a really great opportunity for me to go down memory lane on this one. You were really big on making sure we understood what the business case was so that we could have really fruitful and meaningful conversations with the operations teams. Because as you said, it was, not a lot of patience and time for it. But once we put the business case around it and for them to really understand, okay, this is how they can influence change, that made a difference. And so I've got two examples that I'll share with the group. And the one was, as you mentioned earlier, I'm vertically challenged, standing at 4'11". for the most part, pretty quiet. I like to observe and assess the room, but it's always been a challenge of mine to, when to interject. And again, through maturity and growing, I found different ways to interject myself. This particular instance, I kind of just had it, if you will. And I think one of the terms I used was, how do you sleep at night? When you're bidding some of these things and it's not really true, or it's going to be impossible for us to do. And we just kind of bantered and we, disagreed. We had different opinions about it, but because I felt so overwhelmed with his stature, this person was, I don't know, 6'4" ish. So felt like 2 feet over me. So we were on the staircase. I just wanted to make sure that he understood that I wanted to be heard and I wanted to make sure that they knew where I was coming from. So I placed myself where I could see him eye to eye, and we had a very heated conversation. And it was respectful, but there was some tension around there. And after the incident occurred, I went back to my boss's office, my supervisor's office at the time was Steve, and said, had an altercation. You'll probably hear about it, but this was the conversation that was had, and here's where we're at. And I think after that, they being in the business development section, we had a different kind of relationship after that as a whole. And they did look to me for counsel, and they did look to me for recommendations on what to do. But at that point, I was no longer quiet about where we were at. So I was able to express myself a little bit differently and move out from there. So, again, it was a way of developing relational capacity, but it was also, I think, at some points, I wasn't taken seriously until after that activity and effort. So that was one instance that we
It's a
had.
great memory. And if I could, Lupe, I want to put just a little bit of color around that. Think about knowing her martial arts skills and background and doing some competitive fighting in her day. She had gone into the business development meeting already and had come out back to me, hey, no one's listening to me. They're doing things that I know aren't going to work. And so instead of me rushing in there, I said, okay, well, here, try this. Let's go back and talk to them about this. And so I think this was really like the fourth meeting, and the individual that she's referring to had pretty much dismissed her. And so, as the story goes, from feedback that I got from other folks, was she's trying to have a conversation with this guy. He's totally blowing her off. He goes upstairs to the second floor where his office was, and she goes up past him, finds the right stair level so she can, one, stop his progress, but also be able to look him directly in the eyes and at him, I believe, back down off a couple stairs. as the story goes, all professional, no tough language or screaming and shouting. It was just like, hey, I think you said it right, Lydia. You had it up to here, and want to make sure that your point got made. And really, I think that's kind of an extreme example sometimes, but it's a real life example, right? These are things that you have to do, and it's really, boils down to being brave, right? And having that courage to confront, because it's real easy just to talk about it, back in the office about how much you dislike some of it, to do something about it, especially as a young leader, and, finding your voice and really being able to step into it. So great story. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the other one that would be interesting, by this time you were well along in your professional career, well respected within the organization. We had a lot of wins. We, basically took a accident rate that was at a really high level in the company and brought it down to world-class standards. And Lydia decided to, take another challenge and pivot and move onto a big contract overseas, which was at the time the largest U.S. military contract that was going to be let. It was located over in the country of Kuwait, just a massive undertaking. And I think through that process, Lydia, you had some really good aha moments. So why don't you kind of share some of the learning in that space that you picked up?
That was a really pivotal moment in my career. And on reflecting, one of the hardest things that I did. stepping away, and as Steve mentioned, when I first came to the organization, our TRIR was like 3.5, around that kind of injury rate or higher in 2004. When I went to Kuwait, we got it just right at 1, I think. And then subsequently after that, we've dropped it below then. And even today, we're sitting at about a
Wow.
0.6 right now. And that's with the different growth that we've had. But going to the contract, again, I'll talk about some of the relational capacity. I had a team of, it's about 300 total. And so that's foreign nationals and US folks. And so it was like running a small program myself, just in the environment, health, and safety place. So we had safety, and then we had the environmental team. But understanding that, a lot of the folks there were foreign national, they were away from their families and trying to survive as well. And I took the time to listen to the group, learned what some of the challenges that they had. We made some small adjustments. And I'll tell you, those adjustments were incredible. The amount of productivity we got out of it, the loyalty that came from it was just really amazing. And just small gestures, understanding the workforce, understanding the people that are there. And I looked at staffing, and I changed some positions from American nationals to the foreign nationals, gave them a little bit of a increase in salary, which allowed them to do other things like get a driver's license or bring their families over. And that was, again, just a incredible amount of appreciation from the workforce. And then I went to each of the different departments, and because it was multicultural, I reached out to them and said, hey, can you teach me a different word every time I come in? And we shared food, different types of food, and I learned more about them. But again, just building that relational capacity, these guys were able to do the work that they wouldn't have done before, because there was a lot of commitment, I guess, that they didn't feel that the company previous to us was taking care of them. And so just a little bit of care, just a little bit of interest went a long, long way. So working with my team was one element. The other side was the customer. So the customer didn't understand some of the things that we were doing. And so we had to bring that to light. We had to make sure that they understood, here's why we're doing these things and here's why it's important. And it protects you from different types of exposure, from a liability standpoint, or from a health and safety standpoint, not just from employees, but it's your service members, it's your other folks that are coming in to visit. We have to put some rigor around controls that ensure safety and environmental stewardship. And so breaking it down for them in that capacity, but then also showcasing that there is an element that ensures productivity, that doesn't allow mishaps to occur. Because when a mishap occurs, then you have loss of productivity. Working to showcase how all of that works together, and then educating my leadership team on how to have the same conversations with the customer, just made it that much more solid in its approach. So it became a foundational piece. So we would have a leadership moment, and then we would also have an EHS moment before we started our work shifts. And so those kind of went hand in hand. And we became a real strong force with the group in terms of environment, health, and safety. So they would come to the EHS team and say, hey, we have a new project that we're doing. What are some of the concerns or issues that you might see? And then we work through that. So that became a methodology and an approach that was used. And so unlike the previous experience where they talked about they didn't have patience or time for some of this, it became part of the work that we did, not something
You've said
additional.
so many things that are great. I'd like to unpack a few of them, even going back to the story that you had at the start. One of the lessons that really stuck out for me in your story as I was listening to it was the ability to be very flexible in your life and know that pivoting's okay. Yeah, you went through so many changes, I feel, going through school, then and I can relate to this because my life career pattern is all over the map, and for some people that would be a little crazy, but there is some value there, I think, and I feel like that's probably what's made you such a quality leader, is your experience in all those different areas, and the fact that sometimes your plans don't work out the way you wish they were. And so, okay, what do? You can sit around and sulk, or you can pivot and say, boom, I've got a new path, I've got a new goal, and then start to go down that pathway. So I feel like for me, that was one of the big things that I noticed in your life story.
Yeah, there are so many layers to the things that both her and her husband Jack have done together as a couple. And I think one of the great things is that they've had this support with each other that has really kept them both in their professional lives on track. And so I think that was part of your dynamic and the success. The other thing, Lupe, I just want to give a shout out to a guy named Bill Cooler, who was the program manager in Kuwait. Bill pretty much gave us the free reign to bring this program in and get it up and running. But there was some good accountability there. But, it really, the lessons learned, I think, for the rest of that team and the modus operatus that we went in with is that, hey, we're going to have a lot of respect for these third country nationals that were already working in theater on the contract. They knew so much more about what was going on. And they were really shocked at first, like, why is Lydia asking me these questions? Why, does she want to not trust me? And it was really, getting to the point where they had that relational capacity and they could learn from each other. And that whole servant leadership paradigm where the previous contract company was really top down, heavy managed. We were able to spin this one up to where, a lot more people had a voice, a lot more problems got solved at, local level. Things didn't have to filter up to the program manager, on this. It was $2 billion contract, I think, at the time it came over, and it's just, just huge amount of work and stress. But anyway, great story, Lydia, and another good memory there.
Your last story, Lydia, when you're talking about some of those small things that you did for the team, I perceive those as taking care of the team. One of the things that I feel is really critical that we as leaders understand is that, hey, if we take care of our team, they in turn will take care of the business, and they will take care of us, I guess you could say, right? And I think that sometimes people feel that you have to choose between the business needs and people's needs. But in reality, if you're creative and you really have the mindset, you're able to not have to choose between the two. You can do both at the same time. And some of the success that you said that you had with, especially with TCIR, et cetera, it feels to me it was part of that equation. Increase their salary so they can bring their families, closer to where they're at, et cetera. Is that in essence what you feel happened there, or is there something else going on that maybe I might have missed?
No, I think that is a good summary of that. Definitely, taking care of the team. If you don't take care of yourself and you don't take care of, some of the things that are important to you from a value standpoint, that's going to reflect in other things that you do. So, if you're happy at home, you're happy at work, you're delivering, you get recognition, all of those things tie together. So when I mentioned earlier on about understanding how others are motivated or how others are committed to different things, but understanding what helps them, what makes them happy, what motivates, what encourages individuals to do. And a lot of times it's just knowing that somebody cares about you, that, you're not just a number, you're not just a warm body, but that, you have opinions on certain things and you have ideas about how to make improvements on other things. And so, allowing that kind of dialogue to happen really helps them to feel valued. And once they feel valued, you are certainly going to get the return on investment, if you will, in that
I'd love
space.
to get your perspective on this question. We have a lot of new leaders or leaders that maybe have not led teams, except for right now for the first time. If you could go back in time and give yourself advice, what would that advice be? And then more specifically, we have female listeners, and that presents its own challenges in some environments. What different advice, if any, would you give to those listeners?
For new leaders, we talked about this a little bit already, but the relational capacity, building those relationships and sharing. Be okay to communicate your ideas, right? Because that helps build credibility. But, understanding your craft, knowing your material, and then if you have those ideas, right? So some of the challenges that I had that Steve mentioned was, studying the information, getting that put out there and making some recommendations for what to do. So present some of those ideas and be okay with having to pivot. If it's not the right recommendation, maybe we can collaborate on something and get to where we want to go, but it's still an idea that you put out there and that builds your credibility. So being able to build those relationships, have the confidence in yourself to communicate your ideas, right, wrong, or indifferent, at least you're putting that out there and you can adjust. I mean, if you don't, then I think you really limit yourself on different capabilities. So being able to put yourself out there is, I think, commendable because if it's not the right mix, you can learn from that. There's a lesson there and you can adjust and you can make changes as you move along. So those are the things that I think fundamentally I would really stress on a new leader is to build those relationships, put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but you should also own some of those as well. And when I say own it, I mean it's okay to make a mistake, but learn from that mistake, make those adjustments and move forward. For females, I don't know that I would change anything there. Maybe being heard is the thing, but I think there are other groups that need to be heard too. But having the courage to be heard. And even if it's like in small groups, if you have trust in somebody and you want to bounce an idea off of, reach out to them and say, hey, I'd like to bounce an idea off of you. What do you think about this? And then communicate that. But have the courage to be
I
heard.
think that's great advice. And you're right, that's universal. And one can argue that more of those types of situations could happen to a specific type of individual in the industry out in the world, right? But nonetheless, it does happen probably to everyone. And so your ability to, stand your ground and find a partner, find a champion that will support you. I think that can give you confidence, bouncing those ideas, give you the confidence of, hey, wait, I am on the right track. I do have a valid point, probably gives you that confidence to hold that ground. So I appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Lydia, I think just some interesting things for me to have you share with the listeners is how you're currently developing individuals for your succession. Right, that's one of the things that we've talked about a little bit. Is what you're looking at in terms of the next opportunity for either yourself within the organization or just spiritually as a family member. As you think about the folks that are in your organization, what are you looking at for them, and are there any books you like to recommend or other things along those lines?
I actually learned a lot of how to develop folks from you. I felt that working with you was always a test. Every day was a test, right? When I asked a question, I pretty much knew that I was going to get the same question asked back to me. So you were really big on strategy. And so that is one of the things that I really push on to my team is to understand strategy and how that works. I do a succession plan. I keep one updated because I'm always looking for my replacement, whether it's because I'm on vacation or I've got other things that I'm working on. But I really believe that everyone on my team should be able to step in and do the next highest role in the structure there. So there are times when I will provide opportunities for the team to lead the function how they want to, and just go through different scenarios, and each one of us walking through our strategy. And, at different levels, they're navigating different strategies. We're working through collectively finding it as a team. As far as books, I have not been really great about my own reading. So that's something that I miss, that you were actually really good. John Cotter was one of, I think, the ones that you would recommend that we read a lot of. I will say the fable about the penguins was like one of my favorites. So if you remember that one, the iceberg is melting. That is one of my favorites. It's a short read, but especially when you're working in an environment where there's constant change. In our company, we've gone through several integrations with different companies, and then merging as a company, bringing on new employees. The iceberg is melting is very suitable for that. And I recommend it. I know it's an older book. It's been out there for a while, but I think the message is really
We'll
profound.
be sure to include that in our notes for the episode. So thank you for referencing that.
Yeah. My other favorite from Steve is The Heart of Change. That one is one that I enjoy as well.
This has been great, Lydia. We really appreciate your time. We could probably keep on talking for days, and hopefully we'll get you back on, because I think that's our new format that we're looking at, is just to go back and touch base again with some of the people that we've had on, just to find out kind of what's changed, where they're at, and the next kind of opportunities that they're seeing in this space. So thank you. It's been great catching up. Any final thoughts or parting word?
Well, thank you both for having me on. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you about my journey and share. Look forward to other opportunities.
I appreciate the time that you've spent with us and the shared perspective and some of your career professional lessons. I know our listeners will definitely benefit from that, and we appreciate investment in their future development. So thank you very much for that. Steve, I think we are ready to wrap this up. This has been great first episode of our new format, and I'm looking forward to future guests. But for now, this is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and thank you for joining us on the Leadership Exchange.